New chapter 3.1. We're going to call this A because this section is pretty long, mostly long, just because it is going over things that you've already had over the years. So it's just going to kind of go through some quick things. And one of the first things we're going to do is the rectangular coordinate system. If you remember from a while back in your learning, you learned the basics about this coordinate system, rectangular coordinate system, Cartesian plane, XY axis, lots of different names that people give this. But this is something that you have learned and will continue to use throughout your math career. So we've got a number line that is horizontal, that is the x-axis. We've got a number line that's vertical, called the y-axis. And we can graph any two-dimensional points. Now I say two-dimensional because it means it's got length and width or length and height, 2 dimensions. And we can graph those 2 dimensions by being given 2 pieces of information. And those bits of information need to be numbers. So for example, I can give you 2 pieces of information right there. The first number represents where the number falls on the x-axis, and the other one is where the number falls on the y-axis. Where the 2 lines cross is called the origin. It's at the point 0, 0. We don't move over left to right any. We don't go up and down any. So therefore, we didn't do anything. We've got 4 different quadrants. Quadrants is spelled with a Q. And again, this is old stuff for most of you. And the quadrants are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4 using Roman numerals. And the first quadrant is over here, and it goes 2, 3, 4. Oftentimes, you'll have to tell me what quadrant a certain point is in, because down the road, knowing those quadrants is important. So what this means when we have these coordinates is it tells us from the origin, we go over -2. So in this case, negative is always in the left-hand direction, just like on any number line. And the y says once we get over to -2, we go up or down +1. But in this case, with the y-axis, we go up positive, down negative. So this point goes over 2, up 1, and that point is right there. So if you're giving somebody directions and you say, starting at the origin, go over -2, 1, you're going to go over -2 first and then up 1. And that's pretty much what it is for the coordinate plane, as well as the x and y coordinates. So if I give you 2, 5, that should be pretty easy to graph. We go over 2 in the left or right position. Since it's positive, we go to the right. And then the 5 is positive, so we go up from there 5 units, and we end up there. And we can label this point 2, 5. If we're at -2, -5. Again, we start at 0. We go over -2 and then down to -5. Okay, that's pretty much it for that. Example number 2, we have a little bit of variety there because we've got some fractions that we're going to deal with. One of the things about graphing fractions is that you can never be exact. You can't ever be right where you should be as far as being able to graph a fraction. So for example, if we have 1/2, 2, that means we go over to the right 1/2, which is somewhere about right there, and then we go up 2 from there. So we end up with a point about right there. And that's the point 1/2, 2. If we're given something like 0, -2, that means we went left or right 0 and up or down 2. In this case, it says negative, so left or right, we don't go anywhere. We stay at the origin, then we go down 2, and then that's our point there. Sometimes we'll be given this, where it says go left 2 to the -2, and then go up or down, nothing. We don't move at all. So we end up right there on that line. So that gets us through example number 2. So for example 3, they give us the equation y equals -1/3 x. Now we're just kind of getting started on how to do this. So they're going to teach it to you as if you've never had this before, but then go quickly because they know you have. So if you remember from years past, you get a table here. And what we're going to do is we're going to graph this equation. Now, anytime we have an equation that has no exponents on the variables, we get what is called a linear graph, or this is called a linear equation, which means the picture of this, when we graph it over here, is always going to give us a straight line. And so what we're going to do is we are going to find 3 points, and then that will give us our points that we can connect the dots and get a straight line. So what that means is we come up with any stinking numbers we want to for x. So I'm going to use 0, 3, and -3. I usually try to pick 0, and then I try to pick a small number that's positive and negative. And when you have a fraction here like this, you always want to pick a number that's a multiple of 3. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, something like that. And use those, because what happens is the fraction goes away, and then you're not trying to graph fractions, so it makes it easier. So whenever something's a fraction, use for your x terms a number that is a multiple of 3, especially if that fraction is multiplied by x. That's usually when you're going to do this. All right, so let's use the 0 for the x. I'm just going to put a 0 in there and do the multiplication. When I multiply that by 0, I get 0. Okay. Let me put my 0 back. Okay, let's try 3. Y equals -1 times 3 is -3 over 3, which equals -1. Let's try -1/3. Let's multiply it by -3. -3 times -1 is +3 over 3, which equals 1. Okay, so what that means is every time I plug a number in for x, and I multiply it or do whatever the equation asks me to do with that x, that number, it's going to spit out a y. It's going to give me a y value based on the number that x is. In this case, it's 0. This case, it's 1. This case, it's negative, or it's also 1. Wait a minute. This one here is -1, isn't it? Sorry about that. All right, so then we graph. We graph the point 0, 0. Graph the point 3, -1, over 3, down 1. Graph the point -3, +1. And when we do that, we will always get a straight line. Notice when I'm going from left to right, notice what happens to my line. It goes downhill. It goes downhill because the number in front of the x is a negative. Whenever the number in front of the x is a negative, from left to right, it goes downhill. If that number were positive from left to right, it would go uphill. So you can just look at this number in front of the x when it's set up correctly and decide whether the line's going to go downhill from left to right or uphill from left to right. But we'll get into more of that later. So as we move through here, one of the things you need to be aware of is lines that go through the origin, or that go through 0, 0, the place where they cross. You can pretty much have any equation And each one of these will have a line, or the drawing of each one of these graphs or equations will give me a graph that goes through the origin. So it will be at different angles. So one may go one like this, one may go like this, one may go like this, but they all go through the origin. Okay, one of the things that you can learn is that when y equals a number times x, and that's all you're given, it will go through the origin. If it doesn't go through the origin, it's because something has been added or subtracted to that number times x. Okay, so when there's a number that's added to it, it shifts that graph 5 units up or down. So when you don't have a number attached to the x, then it goes through the origin every time. So for instance, if we were to do an x and a y, and we were to put a 0, a 2, and a negative 2 in here, put 0 in there, we get 0. Put 2 in there for x, we get 4. Put negative 2 in there for x, and we get negative 4. So when we graph those, we get 0, 0, 2, 4, and negative 2, negative 4, and we get a line. See, it went right through the origin. We do the same thing here. Put 0 here. 0 times 1/2 is 0. I'm going to use red here. So it's 0. We put a 2 in here. Remember I said if you have a 2 there multiply and it's multiplied by the x, you find a multiple of 2. So if we put a 2 in here for x, we get 1. 2 times 1/2. Or if we put a negative 2 in there, put a negative 2, we get negative 1. So when we graph that, we get 0, 0, 2, 1, and negative 2, negative 1, giving me this graph. Okay, and then when I look at this one, let's just put a 1 there, and we do our x, y. And let's do this in blue. I put a 0 in there for x. 1 times 0 is 0. If I put a 2 in there, 2 times 1 is 2. If I put a negative 2 in there, I get negative 2. So let's graph that in blue. 0, 0, 2, 2, negative 2, negative 2. Whoops. 2, 2. Negative 2, negative 2, and when I draw this line, it also goes through the origin. So it depends on what number is in front of the x on how steep the line goes from left to right. So notice the red one is not really very steep. It's the one with the smaller number. The big number, 2, look how steep that is. It goes way steep. And then the 1 is the red one, which is, the blue one, which is steeper than the red one because that number 1 is between 1/2 and 2. So obviously it's going to be this blue line that's in between steepness. So lots of information there, but hopefully it's review, and probably I'm teaching it different than what you learned it. Every teacher teaches it differently. I've been teaching it for a long time, so hopefully my method is something that makes it easy to understand if you ever had trouble with it. So what they're saying is that y equals a number, and we'll call that number m. That's what the book calls it. It has a certain name for it other than m, and we'll get to that in a minute, times x. So anytime you have the letter y equals some number, we'll call it m, we don't know what it is, times x, we get a straight line, and that straight line goes through the origin every stinking time. Okay, now let's see what happens if we were to add a number to that. And remember earlier I said that number there causes that line that goes through the origin to shift, to move up or down. So for instance, if it shifted up 3, it would be the same angle but through 3. If it shifted negative 3, it would go through negative 3. But the line would be the exact same line from left to right. It would be the same steepness, or in math terms, they called it the same slope. S-L-O-P-E, the same slope. And so that's what we're going to look at. What happens if we add a number to our y equals mx? So let's get rid of that and leave it as y equals mx. And we'll just add some numbers to it or subtract some numbers to it. So for instance, if we have y equals negative 1/3 x plus 2, we're going to make our same little table here. Start out using 0. And when we do that, we get y equals negative 1/3 times 0 plus 2. Negative 1/3 times 0 is 0, so that goes away. So when we put 0 in, we get 2 for our y. Okay, let's erase that. And instead of using 0, let's use 3. So y equals 1/3 times 3 is negative 3/3 plus 2. So y equals negative 1 plus 2, which is 1. Okay, let's try. Say we tried a 3. I need to write my equation back. I erased it. And that was, what was it? Y equals negative 1/3 x plus 2. Okay, so we tried 3. Let's try negative 3. Okay. So negative times a negative is a positive. 3/3 plus 2. 3/3 is 1. So when y, or x is negative 3, y is positive 3. Okay, so let's go ahead and graph that. Graph it in blue. 0, 2, 3, 1, negative 3, positive 3. Okay, notice my graph goes downhill from left to right. Just like I said, if the number in front of the x has a negative, it's going to go downhill. If this were a positive, it would go uphill. So I know that's right. I'm going the right direction. And also notice what happened here. Rather than my line going through the origin, if I were to get rid of this 2 right here, and I just had y equals negative 1/3 x, it would go through the origin. But because I added 2 to it, it shifted up 1, 2. Same line, it's just 2 units higher than if this 2 was not there. Okay? So very important to remember that, and we'll get into some names for all of this stuff here in a minute. So let's try another one. If you look at example number 5, so example number 5, I'm going to put an X and a Y here. One of the things I want you to see is this negative 1/3. So I know it's going to go downhill from left to right. So I know that. And let's go ahead and put some numbers in. We're going to put a 0 in for x. When I put 0 in for x, when I multiply that, I get 0. So y equals 0 minus 4, or negative 4. Okay. Let's try 6. Because 6 is a multiple of 3. And finally, let's try -6. And then we'll go to the next video. So y equals 6/3, or -6/-3 minus 4. 6/3 is a +2 minus 4. That gives me a -2. So let's graph this. 0, -4. 6, -6. -6, -2. Okay, so notice what happened. This graph shifted -4. 1, 2, 3, 4 down. Same angle, everything as -1/3 x, but the negative sign means from the origin it goes down 4, and then you draw the line. All right, we'll continue this with the next video.